and gentlemen, please welcome to Morning Meeting. Thank you for joining. We're delighted to have you here. Sean, Dan, and I are going to run through the day's events, kick it around a bit between us, and then ask those of you here on the two-way platform to join in. If you'd like to ask a question and you're here on two-way, please raise your electronic hand. I already see some great hands up and some new people, which we always love, so thank you for that. And whether you're here on two-way or watching on YouTube, as always, peace, love, and understanding, presumption of grace. We're going to talk about some people today in the news. Bobby Kennedy, Pete Hegseth, maybe Elon Musk, maybe Governor Noem. And they're all people. They all have families. They all have feelings. So when we talk about them, we're going to be respectful of them as human beings, which doesn't mean that we might not say some things that are, I'll say, cutting about some of them potentially. I'll run through the day book. Again, please raise your hand. Gentlemen, good morning.
By the way, that was the bless your heart version, political version.
It was. I think now I'm gonna show a card. I think now Bobby Kennedy might be nominated for a confirmed position. And if you assume that the gods, the Capitol Hill gods, always smite one nominee, I think that Bobby Kennedy and Governor Noem might have to send thank you notes to Pete Hegseth, because he may be the smited one. Sean, just quickly tell us. We'll come back to you on this at great length. But how well do you know Pete Hegseth?
I'd say fairly well.
Fairly well. And Dan, you probably never met him.
I've never met him, but I feel like I'm getting to know him pretty quickly here.
Yeah. He has appeared more in public with his shirt off than all three of us combined.
Right.
Yeah. All right, here we go. President Biden remarks at something called Classroom to Career Summit with Dr. Joe Biden, 10 a.m. Then at 11 o'clock, photo op, the two presidents, the former future president and the current president. It's going to be incredible. No matter what happens, it'll be incredible. Be fed out live. Everybody gather around the electronic hearth to watch that one. White House briefing, 12:30. Kamala Harris. Receive briefings and conduct internal meetings with staff, all closed press. Get used to that. Donald Trump, after his meeting at the White House, is meeting with House Republicans. I wouldn't be shocked if he also met with Senate Republicans, although I don't believe that's been publicly announced. House leadership elections today. The big one there is House conference. What do you call that?
Chair.
Conference chair. Thank you, conference chair. And then they're having a press availability to celebrate the results at 3 p.m. Senate Republicans are having their big majority leader election. I've revised my view based on my reporting about who's going to win. That's a deep tease for you. House Democrats, 11 o'clock press conference. So I did my big warm-up about not being mean to people who are nominated for jobs. I've been struck by how many people who know Pete Hegseth think he's a bad pick, who know him well. This should never be about unorthodox picks, right? People should not say, just because somebody has an unorthodox resume, because there's lots of arguments made that the Pentagon needs a big shakeup. And if you take his resume, 2 Ivy League degrees and combat experience and overseas experience and long-standing support for the military, he seems to be fine. But there are two big question marks, Sean, that I'm hearing already about him, including from Republicans on the Hill. One is his level of management experience. Is one of the biggest management jobs in the world, and people have sent in Fortune 500 CEOs, and they've sent in people who've worked in the building for years. That 5-sided building is a beast. There's nothing like it on planet Earth in the history of the planet. And number two, they're questioning whether he's going to survive the vetting. And I'll leave it at that for now. Those are the two things I'm hearing. Sean, why was he picked, and what will happen to his nomination?
So let me give you your quote to start off. If you were shocked by the selection of Pete Hegseth, buckle up, baby. You haven't seen anything yet. Full stop. Okay.
Is that a quote of you? Are you quoting yourself there?
Yeah. I'm quoting me to me.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just figured that it helped the social media folks clip that.
Yeah.
So look, I said this the other day. I'll reiterate it again. They are going in with people and process to shake things up, and the Pentagon is at the top of that list. If you wear more than 1 stars or you an SES, and you have anything to do with training or DEI or lack of non-combat readiness issues, you better wake up and get your resume in order. They want institutional change, priority change. I sat in the Situation Room multiple times where the president grew unbelievably frustrated with the choices that were given to him about how to handle Afghanistan, et cetera. He does not want a yes man. He does not want someone who's come up through the defense industrial complex. And for those reasons, I mean, Pete has deployed to Gitmo, Iraq, Afghanistan. He ran Concerned Veterans for America. He's written multiple books. Like as you mentioned, educationally, he's gone to Ivy League schools. He has an agenda to come in. And the thing that people are missing about the president's picks is everyone looks at what they've said in the past. The biggest qualifier is, do you understand the mission at hand, which is to implement his agenda, not yours. So when they pull up previous statements that somebody's made, it's almost irrelevant. As long as you understand that your job and your highest qualification is the understanding that what you will be doing is fulfilling his priorities and his agenda, not yours, then you will get the job. The people who are coming into this saying, here's what I want to do, no bueno. So
and Sean, the only thing I'd add to what you just said is he's entitled to his agenda, and his agenda isn't nuts. The building doesn't work for America as well as it could.
Right, and that's the point, is that you have to, in the nomination process, in this case, have to be on the side of bureaucracy. And that's what I think they're going to frame this as, is that either you support the status quo of an organization that can't get its budget together, that has multiple systemic management problems. You want the status quo, or you're willing to shake things up. And I think you will see some names at the DepSec and below level that will reassure people. And so I think that's going to buy some much needed assistance on that. But there's some service secretary slots, and the deputy and undersecretary positions are particularly important at the Pentagon that I think will reassure some people. But I would hate to be the senator that steps out first and says that they're going to have a problem with Pete because you are defending the status quo, which even veterans of the Pentagon will tell you it needs reform.
Dan, wait one more second, if you would. What about the notion that two parts of the job that are vital, even with massive reform? One is managing 2 million people.
Yeah.
And the other is dealing with defense ministers and heads of state all over the world. Are you fully confident he can do both those things? Or you're saying he won't manage
look at the previous
building?
I mean, with all due respect to the previous secretaries of defense, I mean, no, I'm just saying that you can't say that he doesn't have it, but you look at some of the previous secretaries of defense and their management experience and say, well, what are you grading on? Suddenly now you're going to accept
I agree.
it.
I agree, but we want excellence in all respects. And
I agree. Look, yeah. I would rather have somebody going in there with the mindset that we need to have our priorities straight. We need to understand the military challenges from China and elsewhere that we face, that understands the priorities that need to be handled in the Department of Defense and the particular services, than someone who's going to go in there and push paper. So the only qualm I have with the president's picks right now are they're way too Army heavy.
Yeah, I knew you'd say that. Dan, do you think Democrats are going to oppose him, like, 48, 47 opposed?
Yep, I sure do. I mean, we talked the last few days. When would you pick a fight? I'd pick a fight on this one, because for everything that Sean just said, right, it is the pantheon of bureaucracy. And if this guy is being picked to go in there and fulfill every grievance against military generals who have spoken out, Mark, to your point, the job is not just to clean up the bureaucracy. The job is to keep us safe.
But that's the point, though, Dan. Is that
but hold on, Sean. You're picking someone who's most well known for being on Fox News for the last 8 years. Doesn't mean that you're disqualified. But of all the places that you're going to do this, right? It is with 2 wars going on overseas, potentially a third with China. The world is very unsteady, as we heard about for 4 years now, or the whole campaign. If I were Democrats, of all the people who have been picked so far, I would train my fire that this guy is Margaret Spellings and he is not qualified to lead the Defense Department. I don't care how many undersecretaries.
You mean Harriet Miers, not Margaret.
I mean,
Stone.
Harriet Miers. Sorry. I get my.
But I will say
That's
this,
okay.
with respect to the problem with Harriet Miers when she was chosen is the base wasn't with the president, right? That was the problem. It was the right flank that said no to her. This time, the right is with the president on this. And at the end of the day.
But the right isn't the majority of the country. The right of the base.
First of all, I mean, Pete ran Concerned Veterans for America, which is where I first met him. Back before he did, I mean, that's how he broke into Fox, was running a veterans organization that demanded change in the VA. The bottom line, though, is with respect to your point, and I agree with you, but if our priority in the military has become DEI training and wokeness, not military readiness, then we aren't ready to take on China. And I think that that's the point, is we need somebody who says, here's the threat, here's how we're going to address it, not all the training about your feelings and wokeness. That's not where we need to be right now.
There are other people in the country. I'm just stating a fact. Nothing against Pete. There are other people in the country who could carry out the president's agenda.
I agree.
Besides Pete. He's not the only one. So here's what I think. I think that there are going to be news stories about his life that will give excuses to senators, Republicans who want to vote against him. So if it's 53, right, they got to get 4 to stop him. If Democrats want to stop him, right? Because if it's 50-50, Vance confirms him. So let's assume Murkowski and Collins. And when I talk about confirmations, I always try to stay with the whip count because everything else is meaningless, right? So Murkowski and Collins could vote no just because they could, and they might want to set early on that they're not safe votes. So the question is, there are 2 other people. Okay, I have no idea. I've not done any reporting. Could Dan Sullivan vote against him? Good. Dan Sullivan could say, he's not my conception of someone to run the building. Okay. There aren't very many. Go ahead.
So I would just say, I think you're right. But here's what we saw a la Jeff Flake and I'm blanking on Nebraska, University of Florida, Ben Sass. You're right. Could they do that? And then look at what the president did to Tester after he voted against Ronnie Jackson for VA, right? Yeah. I mean, so sure. But the second thing that I would point out, because I think, look, you brought up a really interesting point in the conversations that I've had with people who are thinking about confirmed positions as well as high profile positions in the White House, is that I've said to them, I just want you to understand something. If you think about something that you've done in your life that you don't want people to know or you're embarrassed about, then do not put your name forward and your family through what's about to happen. Because no matter how much you think you've hidden it, or, it's 20 years ago, the odds are pretty good that it's going to come out somehow, a la Brett Kavanaugh, et cetera. And my point is that the advice that I've given to folks is, you think that you're better than the system, it will always get you. And I think that people think that somehow they're always the exception to the rule.
Correct. And Sean, there's another dynamic that adds on that's particular to the Trump world, which is what they think either explicitly or in the back of their mind is, Trump survived way worse than I did. So if Trump can survive it, of course I can survive it, even if it comes out. And the reality is, Trump is superhuman. He doesn't fall the way other people will. And I'm just telling you, when the journalism goes on this guy, there's going to be things that people will seize on. They may not kill his confirmation.
Well, but the point that I've made to folks, and this has happened to a couple of individuals that I've spoken to in the past on this, is he may stick by you. And that's a whole separate issue. Are you willing to put your family through?
Correct.
Everything. Correct. He is Teflon for a reason.
But it doesn't matter if Trump sticks by you if you lose 4 Republicans.
Will your spouse stand by you?
Will your spouse stand by you? Will your kids? Will your business prospects, current employer, if you have to go back? All that's on the front end. But then on the back end is Trump says, I don't care. And you go rev up Steve Bannon and you rev up everybody else to say they're trying to destroy this good man. Don't let them. But then it just comes down to whether there are 4 Republican senators who will vote no or not. So we just don't know. All right. Other names. Kristi Noem. Again, I'm not going to disparage her in some fundamental way, but there's not a lot on her resume that says she should be the head of Homeland Security. Sean, start with you again. Why would Donald Trump want her to have that job? And why would she want that job as compared to lots of other things she could do?
I think because there are people, I'll leave it at this. There are people in Trump orbit, very close to the president, who wanted her to have a job, probably because they wanted clients.
Yeah, I don't believe it's proper for the president to give her a job so Corey Lewandowski can get clients off of the Department of Homeland Security, which has a lot of private
I was being
contracts.
vague, Mark.
I know you were, but somebody put it in the chat, and I had to read it.
All right,
why would Donald Trump give her that job? I don't understand.
Look,
give her a job, but not that job.
Look, I've asked her. I mean, that one is one where I know that she's been very loyal to him. Again, this goes back to the premise that I said before, which is if you're loyal to him and you're willing to carry out his agenda. And I think if you look at a job like DHS, after you've announced Tom Homan and Stephen Miller, who are going to cannibalize 90% of that department's action, except for TSA, you know, in the Coast Guard, maybe even then, I think that probably falls under Homan too. You wonder, can I be a strong secretary? And if you're willing to play ball, then you'll say, great. So here's my options. Here's what I get. To me, that one, I think just comes down to what I've been saying, that he wants people that understand the dynamic at play, what has to be achieved in terms of border security and immigration, are saying, I got it. And Kristi Noem's been very outspoken on that. She's used the National Guard in South Dakota. And I think that she's term limited. So she needs something, you know, somewhere to go. And this is a high profile job. Like, there's no question about it. This is a top priority for the president. So having someone in there who understands that, you know, you're going to have to work with Homan and Stephen Miller to execute this agenda and to achieve results, as long as you get the joke as to who's calling the shots, go for it.
Yeah. Dan, is this another one where you predict 47 no votes?
Yeah, I think what this is teeing up an argument that Democrats were on their back foot the last 2 years about competence. Ever since the Afghanistan withdrawal and the struggles with inflation, the administration really, you know, Trump was the strong guy who said, I'll fix it, I can do it. You're seeing openings potentially to argue that this is about, you know, grievance and rewarding friends, not putting people in charge who are going to get results for you.
I don't disagree with that as a tactic, Dan, but I will say this, talking about a multi-term member of the House of Representatives, a two-term governor, and saying she's not qualified might not be the right tactic. You could say she doesn't have enough in the area of expertise, but I look at Dennis McDonough and go, wait a second, what made Dennis McDonough a non-V? I mean, he's been chief of staff, but suddenly a guy who's never served in the military. The number one thing the VA does, frankly, is home loans and medical care. He's got experience in neither. He's I think the second only person that hadn't served, and the first one was Shulkin, who had been at least a doctor working in the VA that understood the medical reform aspects that needed to be done. But look, if you want to talk about qualifications, we go down the list. What was Pete Buttigieg's, you know, in transportation? He managed 63 buses in South Bend, Indiana. No joke, to quote Biden. And
filled potholes.
Yeah, but I mean, look, I think Pete.
Well, look, I mean, these were attacks that came on.
I know, and so I get it. But at the end of the day, I will say this one other that I don't want this overlooked because it's not the high-profile thing. The president selected Bill McGinley to be his White House counsel. Very, very smart move. I've known Bill a while. He is very level-headed, very smart, very well-connected and respected in the legal community. Served as cabinet secretary, low-key but very important position in the first administration. So he's trusted and known.
The president has headed. There's some that we've highlighted at first, but it's important to pick up, I think, on what you said, Sean. His White House counsel, his CIA director choice, his national security advisor choice, his Secretary of State apparent choice. These are all very strong choices from the point of view of the establishment and MAGA. And if you look at their resumes, they're all extremely qualified. And we shouldn't ignore that, even as we're talking about some that are less obviously good for everybody and where the resumes are less obviously match up. One question every administration faces is how much power do you consolidate in the White House and how much do you give to the cabinet secretaries? And not all cabinets departments are created equal. As Sean, you've correctly pointed out, pretty clear that immigration and certain aspects of Homeland Security are going to be done out of the White House, right? National security, I think, will be done, as most White Houses now do, a fair amount out of the White House. I don't think Pete is going to be at the table, or Elise Stefanik is going to be at the table, as much as Rubio is, perhaps, but I think a lot of it will be consolidated. What we don't know now is economic policy. We don't know where Lighthizer is going to end up. We don't know who Treasury is going to be, although I still think it's going to be Scott Bessent. We don't know what role, if any, Kudlow will have. What role we assume McMahon will get commerce, but we don't know that for sure. So, Sean, what are you hearing about how much we'll consolidate just in general? And I'm sorry, one more is Bobby Kennedy. People had assumed he'd be a czar. Now there's talk he may actually be nominated to head HHS. So, what are you hearing about consolidation on economics and a role for Bobby Kennedy, if anything?
You have multiple camps in that. I actually am a favor of him staying based out of the White House, playing sort of the John Kerry role on climate.
Yeah.
I think he could be much more effective because where he needs to affect change isn't just consolidated in HHS, and that is a management job, as we kind of talked about with DOD. Going in and being able to look specifically at NIH, CDC, FDA with
Totally
his.
agree.
So
Totally agree.
that would be to me, but as you've seen, he wants people from the top down. I would like to see Ben Carson. I know there's a huge push among Team Carson for him to go to HHS. And the thing about it is that Tom Price was selected last time because he had legislative experience in that realm, and he obviously a doctor as well. But we wanted to get healthcare reform done first out of the gate. That's not as much of a legislative priority now, and therefore someone like Ben Carson, who has managed a major department, obviously unbelievably skilled as a physician and been around the healthcare world for a long time, I think would be a brilliant pick on that. He's been extremely loyal to President Trump and done a real great job in the time that he's been out of public service. So I would say that there is a big team, Ben Carson, pushing forward. Because Carson's not going to care about the stuff that Bobby wants to go in and do. I think you can play nomination Tetris and get all the pieces to fit better like that. And then what was the other position you asked about?
Well, just the economic team. Is that going to
on the economic team? This is I'm intrigued by this as well because I think Linda McMahon is a shoe-in for commerce. And there's no signs that in fact, the opposite. Everyone I talk to says it's assumed. I'm not going for commerce because Linda's got that, right? So then there's a little like Lighthizer. Does he go? He apparently doesn't want to go back to USTR. Maybe not. And therefore, they're talking about carving out a role for him. I would say that, look, he is very well trusted by the president. And so whatever role he plays is going to be a big one, especially on the tariff front for obvious reasons. And so that to me is more of going to be a personality thing. I was at USTR in the last Bush race, and there's this constant ego power struggle among the people with that, and it usually wins by the most dominant personality. We got NEC, the National Economic Council, you've got Treasury, Commerce, USTR, depending on trade and tariffs, and so it's gonna be a personality thing. Who comes out looking like the alpha dog?
Correct. So McMahon at Commerce. A Lighthizer, former deputy, taking USTR. And then Lighthizer is either counselor to the president, trade czar inside the White House, or NEC head, right? And depending on where he ends up, because I think he'll end up in one of those three, then how do you fill, if he doesn't have the NEC job, how do you fill the NEC job? And how do those two guys relate to the Treasury Secretary? That remains to be seen, a huge question, huge series of questions. Lastly, before we move to the Democrats,
by the way, you know what role, Mark, it's funny how I've gotten more questions. I think you want to talk about, tangentially in the economic world, the OMB role. I mean, there's some old hands that are getting pushed for that, but it's funny how little there people are fighting to be OMB director.
I agree. It's not very much talked about. Same with transportation and energy, not talked about that as much, at least so far. Now, related to the OMB role would be what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are doing, this outside group. Lots of questions about how it's going to be funded, what kind of mandate it will have. Donald Trump gave them a year and a half to finish their work. So, Dan, does that seem relevant to you? Those two guys don't seem to me guys who want an irrelevant role. So how would that be relevant, what they're doing?
It will only be relevant if they, find some huge mismanagement of money or have some sort of example of reason for reform. I mean, this for 30 years, every politician talks about cutting government waste and, fraud and abuse. And the reality is a lot of it is buried deep down within the government, and it's hard to unearth. It's always protected by some member of Congress or senator that, has a parochial interest in it. So unless they have subpoena power, unless they can, compel people to interviews, I think this is just going to get some good ratings on TV a few days, and they will do absolutely nothing. And I'll be curious how much Elon Musk devotes to it versus the 5 companies he's running.
So the thing that's interesting about this, I am fascinated when I read the process stories, as we call them, and they're like, "Well, this isn't how it's supposed to work." Like, if you think I feel like I'm beating a dead horse on this, but I'm like, if you think Donald Trump cares about the process on how it's supposed to work and the norms, then you have continued to misread what's happening. I go back to look at the last White House and what Jared Kushner did, especially in respect to COVID, where he just said, screw it, I'm going to get things done and I'm going to pick up the fall. If people perceive you in Washington, D.C., whether it's Capitol Hill or the White House, to have power and access to power, that's what matters. People knew that Jared Kushner had access to the president for obvious reasons and power, and they would pick up the phone and say, what mountain do you want me to move for you, Jared? I got it. If Elon Musk, and I think he is, and Vivek are both appearing to have the president's ear, then I think they can get stuff done. And it depends whether they, to your point, there's a second question which you brought up, which is how much attention do they want to spend on it? Right. But if they are focused on this, I don't have any question that they will have the authority and access to do it.
Well, I know, but they don't have the authority to actually cut spending.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, I totally agree with you. The idea of like the way things are done, blowing it up is great politics. And I think it is, the country wants it. But Trump has suffered at times from a short attention span and chasing whatever is in the news. And this is not going to be a very sexy thing. And
right. Listen, I spent 3 years at the budget committee. We tried to do 0.5% in 2002 or something, and the members went nuts. Right. So I don't disagree with you. I mean, the Grace Commission, the BRAC efforts. I mean, people think it's all great until it's their base. Right. Yeah. So I may under no illusions, but there's a difference between, having access and power and then ultimately affecting change.
Totally. And of course, entitlements, if they don't do entitlements, they're not really doing anything. Tonight on two-way tonight, we're going to have longtime Democratic strategist, operative, certified genius, Steve Elmendorf, to talk about the future. So please join us for that. In the future news today, The Hill has a story about how Governor Shapiro may be the great future of the party, and Governors Pritzker and Polis formed some new organization intended to have the governors.
Does anyone know Governor Polis?
Polis, yeah,
gosh,
yeah, he's good.
Gosh,
Colorado.
Did anyone used to work for him on the? And whoa, wait a second.
So it seems to me that those 3 guys all have aspirations to be president. If they were offered the job, they'd take it. But it takes commitment, as I've said before. You have to do your day job. You have to spend time with your family. You have to get on a lot of planes, talk to a lot of people, raise a lot of money. Dan, of those 3, as Sean points out, one of whom you know quite well, do you see in those 3 guys, or Gavin Newsom or any other governor, the desire to accept the invitation to go to New Hampshire, assuming New Hampshire's still on the calendar, accept the invitation to raise money, for Democratic things, form new organizations? Who do you see as taking up that baton of those 3 guys, or anybody else who's a governor?
I mean, I don't know Governor Shapiro as well. I know a few people around him. He definitely seems to want to keep his options open, whether or not he truly is going to have the fire in the belly and want to get out of his state and do that. We'll see. I can speak to the other 2. In full disclosure, as people said, I was Jared's chief of staff for a period when he was a member of Congress. And I have a family member who works pretty senior for J.B. Pritzker. I think both of those 2 will test the waters. I think they want to preserve their options. I think that commission, or whatever it is, this group they're forming, they're coming at it from 2 different angles. For JB, this is about firing up the base, picking fights the way Texas and Florida did with Obama and Joe Biden. For Jared, I think the angle is, Colorado is a very libertarian state. And it is, I think for Jared, his angle is going to be states' rights. It's going to be the federal government is encroaching on us. And so they're kind of staking out some different lanes here as they think about, their future and getting themselves into the national conversation, picking a fight with Donald Trump. and probably visiting a few states outside of not neighboring states of theirs, but states that hold these competitions in 2027. And I think Pete Buttigieg speaking at Harvard, he also yesterday, I thought he didn't make too much news, but he did talk about kind of Midwestern humility, decency, and honesty are the virtues that he tends to try to live by, which I saw as reinforcing a strength of his and a contrast with the current administration. And it reminded me a little bit of my old boss, Hillary Clinton, I was working for at the time, who went to Albany in January of 2005 and talked to the pro-choice community and gave an olive branch to the pro-life community about the importance of religious and moral values to, educate teens on abstinence. And it was in response to 2004, Bush winning Ohio, the feeling that the cultural conservatives lifted Bush, and she wanted to make inroads and send a signal about how she would want to run in 2008. Unfortunately for her, the party went in the opposite direction. But you already see, what are we, eight days past the last election, some lanes being very quietly established as people think about their own theories of the case.
Yep. There you see cable roadblock, the Trump Force One landing in the DC area. We'll watch that while we talk. Go ahead, Sean.
I would just say, for what it's worth, I brought this up yesterday, shameless plug. I'll put this in the chat. I put out a list of 14 suggestions for the next White House press secretary that is now public. So I'll put the link in the chat if anyone wants to take a look at my sage advice for what I think you could have an announcement in the next 24 hours on that.
Yeah, you think it'd be a woman or a man?
I'm going to eat my words on this. As you know, I was very clear that I didn't think that men had a shot, and Donald Trump is willing to give men an equal opportunity. I think there's a decent shot it's a man.
I'm back to thinking it'll be a woman, but I don't really know. Sean.
Yeah.
Before we open it up to questions, and we'll just keep watching President Trump's arrival, President-elect / president, are any of the Democratic governors someone who you look at and say, that person's a star? If they really go all in for it, they can beat us in 28. Are any of them daunting to you?
Yeah, let me just, I've been a big believer, and again, I'll defer to Dan on this. I thought Buttigieg, in terms of he checks a lot of boxes, right? He's progressive, and he's got the Afghanistan experience, very well spoken. And I've been a big believer, but wrong, who am I to say with the Democrats? But I say that because I've been very impressed with the job that Wes Moore has done as governor of Maryland. Great resume, very, very well spoken. When he dealt with the bridge incident in Baltimore, really showed that he could rise above partisan politics. As a Republican, I worry about a guy like that.
Interesting. All right. Let's bring folks in again as you come in. I'll unmute you. Tell us where you are, who you voted for in the last election for those who don't know, even if you've been here before, and what's on your mind. Melissa, welcome back. Tell folks where you are, who you supported, and what's on your mind after you unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm a registered independent from Western North Carolina who voted for Obama twice. I lean liberal, and then volunteered with the Bernie campaign. And I have some very strong opinions about, especially with the DNC looking for a new chair. I think it's, I'm not tribal. I vote for whoever I think is best for the country at that time. And I really don't understand the mentality of like vote blue no matter who. In large part, I think this election demonstrated that the Democratic Party is unrecognizable from what it was when Obama ran. And I think nothing illustrates that better than the fact that they were campaigning with the Cheneys. And now the Republicans are the party of the working class. The Republicans are the anti-war party. So, and really their values have almost reversed. So what I wanted to talk and really direct this to, I would really interested to get Dan's thoughts on this while you're looking for a new chair. But I was very gullible and naive when I started with the Bernie campaign and volunteered, because I actually believed that a primary process was democratic. And I just assumed that whoever won the most states, you just naturally would get the most delegates. So you can imagine my surprise when we start the primary process and learning that Hillary Clinton had 400 delegates pledged to her before a single ballot was cast. That was really surprising. Then to see Bernie win states such as Wyoming, and Hillary would walk away with more delegates. So what you realized going forward, then of course we found out more when Donna Brazile released her book, and then also when we had the WikiLeaks and the emails from the DNC came out. And what we realized was, or learned, was that largely through, I believe Hillary Clinton, Dan of course would, I don't know as much about it, but I do know that she financially bailed out the DNC and then was given a lot of power over the process. And you realize that Bernie really didn't even have a chance to win.
Yeah.
And then
Melissa, I'm sorry, just go ahead and ask your question if you could.
Well, what I feel like the Democratic Party has really lost their way because they don't allow a primary process to play out organically. They manipulate the process. They manipulated it again in 2019. And I don't feel, I think what I wanted to ask Dan is there a possibility that a new DNC chair, I feel like there needs to be reform in the primary process to let, maybe an outsider, a businessman, someone come in who's not anointed by the party, who will actually represent the views of the Democrats in the party.
Yeah. So Melissa, you represent, I'll throw it to Dan in a second, you represent the views of tens of millions of people, not just in the Sanders wing. They kept Bernie from winning in 16 and 20 by rigging the rules. They tried to keep they kept Bobby Kennedy. They drove him out of the party. Then they tried to keep him off the ballot. They tried to keep Donald Trump off the ballot. So Dan, do you think the party will move towards, whoever the chair is will move towards that? Or do you think they'll continue to do things? And I'll add to the list something that bothered people was they also helped pro-MAGA candidates win primaries in order to try to get people who are easier to beat. So Dan, what do you think of that cluster of things?
Well, I will say both parties tend to play in the others' primaries to try to stir trouble and promote candidates who could harm the perceived threat. But look, it's a great question. I think there's two parts to it. One is getting away from Iowa and New Hampshire kind of always going first and just the kind of institutional glut that has occurred from those two dominating. And you saw Biden try to move away. My sense is now opportunistic candidates are playing to New Hampshire and Iowa to try to get them back. The problem that the party will have, and I think it's the same on the Republican side, is the delegates that determine it like being super delegate. I mean, they're the same people who are super delegates who get a vote and they get courted, all year long, and flattery goes a long way. I think an outsider coming in and shaking this up, I think has tremendous value and ultimately would produce a better nominee. I mean, I think another place you'd hear a lot of Democrats say is to get rid of caucuses and just go to primaries. I mean, caucuses tend to limit, who has time to go sit for 3 or 4 hours in a gymnasium on a Tuesday night versus just going to pull a lever and, wait in line.
Dan, do you think the party should stop rigging the system for the establishment or not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
do you think they will?
A disaster.
Do you think they will?
I hope they will. I mean, if you think about the last two Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton was not the preferred candidate, right, in 1992, and Barack Obama was not because it was Hillary Clinton. Now, he ultimately kind of overtook her, but every time the party thinks it knows best, it struggled.
So we did this in after 12 in terms of not the calendar as much as, well, we did a little calendar tweaking, but also delegate allocation. And you better, I mean, Dan's right, like you better have a backbone and buy-in from everybody else because it is one of the most sensitive topics. And I'm obviously not as big of an expert on the DNC, but on the RNC, it is a club of like proportions you've never seen. We literally refer to it as the 168 because there's 168 members, and many of them have been there for a while, and they're very institutional. And so reforms to the process, which is one of the things we did after the 12 election, after Romney lost, it is a very, very difficult, issue to deal with in the family.
Yeah, Melissa, thank you for coming back.
But you're right, Melissa. You're absolutely right.
Thank you. Very, very, very important topic, and we should talk about that tonight
Yeah,
with Steve
with
Elmendorf. Hope, welcome in. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Love that great American room behind you. Tell folks where you are, who you supported for president, what's on your mind, please.
Was born, raised, and live in Oregon, and I was originally going to ask Dan a question. I hope to get to it about transgenderism and the Democratic Party, but I just want to mention that we mentioned Governor Pritzker, and when I was watching the statements with the Democrats coming out and saying, "Oh, I voted. I'm a Trump supporter," but when Pritzker came out and they were all making their big statements about how they're going to fight the immigration, when Pritzker said, "You come after my people." And then I thought, who are your people? Are your people the illegal alien that just tried to kill or beat up a Jewish American on his way to his house of worship? Is that your people? I think that Democrats really have to start calibrating their language, because that was really offensive. I thought, who are your people? Your people criminals and murderers? The murderer of Blake and Riley? I mean, that bothered me a lot. I think it was clumsy, and I think it really hurt him. I think that people should be aware of those comments.
Hope, was this your first, second, or third vote for a general election for Donald Trump?
This was my third.
Yeah.
Okay. I was born and raised by Unitarian progressive parents. All of my family, save for one in-law, are liberal Democrats.
Yeah. And did you vote for Barack Obama either time?
I did I voted for
McCain and
no,
Romney.
I voted for him the first time, and the second time I voted for Romney very, very, very reluctantly, because I regret that. Actually, I don't, because what could you do? There was no choice. But I didn't vote for McCain because I just thought he was just very arrogant, and I thought that he was saddled with the whole Bush debacle of Katrina and the financial crisis, and I just found it very arrogant.
What do you hope President Trump does in his time in office?
I hope that he gets the border under control. I hope that he is able to stop the transgender madness, because I think one thing, I wrote this long statement. I know you don't like long statements, so I won't read it. But my point to Dan is that I think that when COVID hit and parents were seeing what was happening on online education with their kids, they went, they're doing what now? Because it's not just about sports. The whole thing about women in sports is kind of overwhelming, the idea, but it's a deeply, deeply misogynistic issue that basically what it does is it gives transgender women, and I put that quotes because it bothers me so much that I even have to identify myself as, well, I'm a biological woman. There shouldn't be all these trans this and trans that. It's really, and for example, I asked this too because Seth Moulton yesterday and Jayapal were arguing, and when he simply said, I worry about my daughters, he didn't say but getting a traumatic brain injury or getting hurt, she called it an offensive comment. And he's simply a father that is worried about the physical safety of his children. But I want to say, but again, I don't want to emphasize the sports thing, because the transgender thing is an economic issue too. That, for example, I look for grants for a living, and more I see, like, for example, the American Association of University Women. It was created because women fought for centuries to get access to higher education. And now their wording says something like, for women or who identify as women. So you're giving a scholarship for women in higher education to a man who simply says he's a woman. What is the point of all these philanthropic organizations and organizations that women have built up if you're just surrendering to? And the other thing, you're empowering two groups that basically hate women. You've got transgender women, the men who think they're women, who parade around and this caricature, this sexist tropes of big hair, big bosoms, garish jewelry. It's offensive. It's repellent. And even to say that, I'm insecure about saying this online, because you can get ruined if you say things like that. But I think that the Democrats have to disassociate themselves from this extreme. It's extreme. And also the other group they're empowering is trans men who are women who want to be men. Now, how does that empower women? It's women who are disavowing their female identity. And also too, it's infiltrating everywhere. I went to the doctor and it said, I had to identify my gender, and it said assigned at birth. I thought, I wasn't assigned a birth. I was born a female. There's nothing dysfunctional about that. And what worries me is you're teaching little girls that there's something unnatural and ugly about your body, and that you're better off if you're a man. And I want Dan to address that.
Yep. Let's let Dan address it, and then Sean, and I think we all want to ask you a couple questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Look, this is a very hard issue on some level. And Mark had a guest on 2-Way Tonight last night who spoke very passionately and elegantly about, I think it was her son. I had kids in the background, so I was kind of a little in and out of the conversation. But we're talking about real people, and people who feel differently about themselves as they get older and make decisions. And I think what issues that you're raising about sports and programs that are designed for certain people, and now you have, you know, for a woman or for a man, and transgender people kind of make this a challenging issue. I've spoken in the past about even schools are trying to figure it out. If you have a child in a single sex school, and suddenly now, what do you do if somebody in the school announces they're changing their gender because you don't have facilities for the opposite sex, or applying inwards? How do you treat this? And I think society is struggling to try to figure this out. It's a new issue. I think where the party has gotten in trouble is when we have mandates and when we don't allow parents to have a voice and a say and kind of a vote, let's say in a school board or whatever, in how are we going to talk to our children about this? What do you do? Because children are very susceptible to outside influence. And I know in New York City that is a huge thing. And hearing parents come on who say, my child comes home and was told, you can be a girl, you can change your gender, and the parents don't know this conversation is happening. They don't know the context of it. And it's very scary to a lot of, I think, Americans, understandably. We have 4 kids, it would be for us. So I think society is going to work this out. I think the party has to figure out how it wants to address this. Kamala Harris basically didn't address it, and it was just a vacuum that got filled. Either you're proud of what you advocated 5 years ago, or you've changed your mind. But she said nothing, and no one in the party knew what to say because they looked at her and thought, I don't want to touch what she was saying.
She said it's the law. And I thought, well, you're a legislator, you're a senator, you can change the law. I mean, that's just a fatuous evasion. To me, it was, if the law is stupid, as it's proven.
Yep. Sean, is this something you think President Trump will continue to talk about, or it was just
I mean, no question. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big betting guy, but I will put $1 million on that one. I think a couple issues. One, you touched on the response she gave at the end. When you're saying, like, I respect the law, part of the reason we elect people is to maintain or change the laws, or right, that even on taxes. And when you say I'm going to cut taxes, that's changing the law. So I agree with you. I thought that was such a cop out of an answer. But secondly, I think we've talked about this before, and I'll without getting into too much, I think there's a big difference between adult issues and how adults choose to live their lives, and the respect that they should be given for the choices. And then secondly, how we deal with kids, number one, the role of parents, number two, and three, the idea of saying, okay, I get it. You want to choose a lifestyle. That's fine. We should respect it. But you can't force me to, same way. I mean, we have freedom of religion. So you can't come in and tell me that I need to act in a certain way because you've made a choice. So anyway, I agree with you. I think it's an issue that, is going to have to get dealt with more on the left than anything else.
Well, I just want to say one more thing, is that the feminist movement is just morally and intellectually bankrupt on this issue, because it's a harm to women. It's an insulting to women. It's like, for example, when Harris, she went to a drag show. I mean, drag is just a complete insult to women. And that was a classic. I just wish that it's ironic that women's rights are being defended by, like, male Catholic intellectuals at this point. And I just one more thing, I would suggest you have Megyn Kelly come on and just explain these issues much better, much more articulately than I can. But I think Dan, I respect him, and I think he's a very articulate guy. But when he was talking there, I just was rolling my eyes and saying, "Oh, more blather about it's just how I just it's hurting women, all women, real, actual, biological, born women." And but I do admire his handkerchiefs. They're very dapper. I'm going to call them Dapper Dans. I look forward to those each day. So thank you.
All right.
Oh,
Thanks for joining. While we try to work with Cynthia to get her unmuted, because I know she's trying. Hope, what's your biggest concern about the Trump administration, of what the president might do?
His capriciousness. And there were two issues. One is that when he abandoned the Kurds, who had been fighting ISIS nobly and effectively, and he just abandoned them to please the Turks. I just thought that was an ignoble, embarrassing, shameful act. And the other thing is when he appeared in front of the National Association of Broadcasters, and sometimes he's just cantankerous for no reason. I thought he'd lost the election at that point. I watched it live, and I looked at all the Fox News reporters, and they looked really shaken. Some of them looked tearful, like they thought the same thing, like he'd blown it. And he came back from that, but sometimes he's just unnecessarily. I thought all you have to do is be courteous. You can do it. We've seen you be charming, but he didn't. He came out just horrible, and so I hope that he can just act as charming as he can be, and also anyway.
John, do you want to respond to either or both of those?
No, I'm good. I think
Thank
you for weighing in and sharing your opinion, though. It's helpful.
Yep.
I enjoy your show too, Sean, very much.
Thank you.
Hope, thank you for joining us. Come back regularly. We really appreciate it. Cynthia, welcome in. Tell folks where you are, who you supported for president, and what's on your mind, please.
Yes, I'm in Maryland, and I voted for Trump. And
Had you voted for Trump before?
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Who would you vote for in the Senate race?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
In the Senate race, did you vote for Hogan or?
Yeah, I voted for Hogan. I was disappointed in his record as our governor, but I wanted to. I was voting against the Democrat in this case. So I have a question. I want to say, as many people have, that I love the platform. I love all three of you, the recent discussion, and the intelligence that people bring to the conversation. I learned so much.
Thank you.
And I've been a listener since July, and I wanted to come on before the election and ask this question, but now it's pertinent as well. I really enjoyed the interview that you had with Jordan Peterson in the summer, and it spawned my thinking about when he said something to the effect that he felt that depending on the election outcome, that the people who were more liberal would have a far worse transition time than the conservatives. And my observation in the past would have agreed with that. And I was wondering, to the three of you, what you think the temperature is of the American public right now. You don't hear a lot about that, more what the meltdowns are on the mainstream media, but the average citizen. And if I was to judge from the people that come on the platform, which are marvelous on all sides, I love their ability to communicate their concerns and their questions, but I feel like it's not nearly as catastrophic or traumatic as we thought it might be. And yet I've watched some of my friends on Facebook who have different views than I do, and some of them are really creating these really dramatic descriptions of what they think, and I'm just shocked by that. So I think there's a lot in the public discourse that I'm not really understanding, and was wondering what you think, all three of you think.
Okay, Cynthia, thank you for joining and for your viewership and for your kind words. And it's a great topic. It's hard to measure. I think in general, we don't see rioting in the streets. We don't see big protests so far. but I think as we get closer to inauguration, there'll be some. I think a lot of the country's stunned. And obviously, you can go on social media, on any social media platform, and find people who are quite upset. Sean, and then Dan, what's your general view of where we are?
So I'm glad. I mean, number one, I think I was really glad how we reacted to the election. Obviously, it's easy to say on my side. So I think the left. I think it was helpful that it was rather decisive. But I do think that it was the way it handled. I will say, and this touches on your point, I'll leave it very concise. I think that you're right on the media. The idea that, as I've said on multiple times, I'm still getting calls. Wow, we missed it. I'm shocked. I can't believe this. I'm surprised. It's like, it shows to me that people might not even really not just be biased, but they really don't get their job, right? Which is to talk to people and to understand what's going on in the country. If a poll says everything is at best 50-50 and you're only talking to 50%, and that is concerning. So I'm actually shocked at the amount of folks in the media that are shocked, because there's a level of ignorance that I think exists, and I think you're seeing that. We talked yesterday about the ratings at MSNBC. You're talking about massive cuts now at CNN, and I think that this is why platforms like this exist, because there's an outlet for people to go and say, I'm not getting what I want from trusted media sources. And so I'm going to go to places where I know that I can hear a discussion that I think is more accurate.
Dan.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised. And I think Sean said the fact that it was not that close. I mean, I think if Harris had won the popular vote, and let's say Trump won 4 of 7 swing states and 200, I'm making this up, 290 electoral votes, there would be more a sense of like grievance of like the majority of the country is with us. And yet again, he's in the White House. I think because it was such a thumping and we didn't take the House back and, the Senate is what it is, there's more of an acceptance of, and I think the conversation is really, what did we miss? Why, how did this happen? Even amongst people who like don't follow this every day, there's like, the worst thing I've seen is this, like, well, now they're going to get what they voted for. And like, I'm going to go back to my life. I think that's patronizing, ridiculous, but like, nevertheless. So I think to Mark's point, you'll see some protests. I think when policy starts actually, like when the rubber meets the road, you may get some more protests and people upset. But, I think the party and the people, the country have handled it pretty well, considering how hot the temperature was just 2 weeks ago.
Cynthia, go ahead.
May I ask or add one other point? Before the election, I wanted to hear some of the people who were campaigning speak to the violence that we have normalized in America. Like, it disturbs me greatly that after a big sports win, they destroy Philadelphia, and during the pandemic, in Minnesota, there were stores, and California, there were stores ransacked, and who paid for that but normal Americans? I mean, those things were tremendous, and nobody really seems to address or have hope there or even expectation that we could make any difference in what we expect of our citizens. And, I'm old enough to remember the riots in '69 because I was in high school then. So I know we've never been like many countries where things are totally destroyed, but it seems like a normalized thing, violence now, or response.
Yeah. Cynthia,
do you have any thoughts on that?
Do you feel as strongly about the violence of January 6th as well?
Yeah, but I don't know. I was also going to call in on that subject because I think there are different narratives that have built up around that are not true. And Mark, I heard you speak kind of on both sides of that issue before. I'm not sure what I believe about that.
Well, okay. If it weren't 9:59, I would engage more, but we got to quit. But please come back, and thank you for participating. Okay. Thank you. Real quick, a couple of announcements tonight. 2-way tonight. Three guests. Steve Elmendorf. Again, if you don't know who he is, Google him. one of the leading mostly behind the scenes figures in the Democratic Party. And he'll be talking to us about the future of the Democratic Party. Meghan McCain will be with us as well. She knows Pete Hegseth. She worked with him at Fox News. She's got some interesting thoughts about whether he's the right choice for defense secretary. And we'll also have the head of the Boston College Republicans, who have been somewhat under siege. Maybe that's too strong a word, but they've been dealing with a lot in the wake of the election results. So 3 great guests tonight, 6 o'clock. Next Tuesday, if you're in New York City and you can join us, it's our first live event, the morning meeting after dark at the Comedy Cellar in Greenwich Village. We'll have details for you soon about the exact start time, ticket prices, ticket availability, etc. So be on the lookout for that. But again, if you're available to be in New York City next Tuesday evening, join the 3 of us for our first live event. Gentlemen, thank you for a lovely program. Sean is right. Be braced for some personnel announcements today. Donald Trump may just blurt them out to House Republicans, who will start texting out to people who he named. But I think you're going to see some personnel things. And as Sean also suggested, some of them will shock you. Guys, have a great day. Thanks for everybody who participated. I'll see you at 6 o'clock tonight. And the 3 of us will be back here, 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. If it's 9 a.m. Eastern time, it's 8 a.m.
It's the morning meeting.
It's the morning meeting. Yeah. All right. Have a great day, everybody.